I want to thank Ken for being here with us. And he's going to be talking about all of his product and his philosophies in reefing. And there's quite a few users here on Discord who appreciate the work that you're doing, Ken. So I want to thank you for just joining and taking the time out. I know you're a busy guy. You were telling me you're very busy today. So they'll thank you again, Ken. And so let's start a little bit on the background. We want to know a little bit about your experience in the hobby before we kind of get into the product, because I think that's going to help us understand a little bit more about your philosophy and going forward. So how long have you been in the hobby?
Well, since October 27, 1984.
Wow.
Yeah.
I feel like you've seen the hobby change a lot at that point then. Wow.
Yeah, of course. The only reason I remember that is it was my birthday. Birthday present, little 10-gallon tank like a lot of people get. The incandescent lights where you used to get to pick the colors, right?
Yeah.
They get all hot and they'd explode if you got water on them, and that was the best lighting we had back then. Of course, I started with freshwater fish, and kind of progressed through that was all that was available where I grew up in North Dakota in the 80s. So just kind of progressed through a lot of different types of freshwater fish. Got into African cichlids, and then, yeah, that's like a lot of people still are. People get pretty hardcore into that stuff, and that's where I really dug in and started collecting fish and things like that. And there's the different focus on water chemistry that's different than a lot of other freshwater fish. So it took me in some other directions that kind of naturally led to marine aquariums.
That's actually pretty interesting. Yeah. So
Yeah,
is that what pushed you to kind of do a little bit more research into something like bacteria in general?
Not necessarily at the time. It was more about just collecting things so back then, of course, there was no internet. You'd set up a tank and you might not think anyone would ever see it. And that was one thing that was kind of cool about everything back then. It was more pure, you didn't care. It was like it was entirely for your own enjoyment. And at least some, people like myself would obsess over things, and you'd have to go to the library or buy magazines to get, advanced information on this shit. And I was a kid, so that stuff was expensive. Books even back then could be $40, $50 a piece if they were any good. So there are a lot of trips to the library. I check out the same book like 3, 4 times, but yeah, it was just just not necessarily like bacteria, or certainly not anything like that. The deep ecological stuff. But just kind of collecting and experimenting and playing around with stuff, getting a feel for what I liked.
What made you passionate about reefs in general?
Reefs. So yeah. So, starting out again in North Dakota, I had to order things and they would just come in. I would call the store in Bismarck and they would tell me what they could get, and I'd get anything they could get. My first marine fish at all was a sea robin of all things, right? Those sculpin-like things that crawl around on the bottom. Can you imagine that? So it was like a crushed coral bottom with an under gravel filter, right? And the dead coral that were,
Yeah.
So like reefs to me, it was only when I started picking up like freshwater and marine aquarium magazine. To this day you still see people like reminiscing about the FAMA days where all the really good shit was coming out, George Smith. Yeah.
Wow. So I feel like you have a whole level of reef keeping experience that I missed. So I've been in the hobby for like 10, not even 12 maybe years, but you have all this experience. You've seen the hobby shift from huge different phases. So now everybody's like struggling to keep their nutrients up. It's like it's a whole different experience than it was back in the day. I remember back in the day, everybody was fighting. Yeah. I feel like, that actually kind of pushes us into the questions of the people that have been like giving us questions for a little bit now. So as an insider's perspective, this is coming from Luthinier. I'm probably going to be butchering everybody's name, so I apologize about that right there. So as someone, and this is you, with an insider's perspective, what do you think the future of reef keeping in general holds in the next 10 years, roughly?
So, the 10 years that you've been in that you said, you've seen almost all of the like generations have changed just in the last 10 years. You've
Yeah.
seen most of it yourself. So much. It's really hard to say where things are going, even from someone inside the industry, because it's crazy with all the regulations, closures, a looming ecological disaster,
Mhm.
global wide. It's like we don't really know what things are going to look like in 10 years. But I don't think the focus will be on equipment as much as it is right now. I think we've really nailed it with lighting, with water flow.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe we'd have said that 10 years ago and just been dismayed by what's available now, right? But and we could just make that many more advances in the next 10. But honestly, I think the biggest changes will probably be in livestock and how we acquire it, how it's produced, and what's available, of course.
So that being said, the thing is, I kind of see this happening too, and the industry in general has shifted. Everybody's, I feel like some people are focusing more on obviously conservation in general, but like, what do you envision, or where do you hope it'll be in 10 years? And this is more of a personal question for you. Yeah.
Yeah, what do I hope? So I like the live stuff. I'm an ecologist in my background. I like to get wild things and observe their truly wild behaviors, when they're fresh off the
Yeah.
boats, so to speak. But that's kind of a frivolous, that the future is almost entirely going to be captive raised livestock.
No. Yeah.
So we're in the infancy of all that right now, of course. So, but
Mhm.
I really applaud people like ORA and
Mhm.
Biota. Those people kick ass, and what they're doing is so incredibly important because say they conquer the larval rearing and
Mhm.
all that for like an anthias. They've just figured
Wow.
out
Yeah.
more or less like crap tons of other anthias. So it'll build upon itself, right? And pretty soon, like almost all the species that we see in the trade, at least fairly regularly, will be available as captive raised, and that will be a benefit to everybody. It's better livestock, really, and obviously it's more responsibly sourced, and it provides good jobs for people like me that like to nerd around growing germs and stuff like that. But I've spent a lot of time working in hatcheries and places like that, and um, I'd be the one to tell you that we really don't know nearly as much as we could know at this
Mhm.
time. Just the larval stages of some of these, especially pelagic spawning fish,
Mhm.
are an utter mystery. So, we have a lot to learn, but some of these people at the forefront are true heroes of our industry, and they're the ones that they'd be better able to tell you to answer that question because they know where we're at and what direction we're going in. But I can say a lot of things that we're used to seeing now and take for granted. We just saw with yellow tangs.
Mhm.
That sometimes $20 some, not anymore, and maybe never
No,
again, right? And
I don't
maybe
think
it
that's ever
shouldn't
gonna
be
happen
that
again. Yeah.
way.
I
No wild
remember.
fish
Yeah.
should be $20,
No.
honestly. I think if people had to pay more for that stuff, they'd appreciate it for what it was. Which is it's a true privilege to own a wild animal of any kind, but certainly one that may be endangered. And they're all endangered because their entire environment is endangered. So anyway, not to get all tree huggy here or anything, but that's a real threat to the industry. So looking ahead 10 years, I saw that was one of the questions I really looked at that
Mhm.
you gave to me earlier, and I sat on that one for a long time because it's so hard with all the changes going on right now.
So,
Um,
the thing
yeah,
is, I welcome a lot of the changes, and the thing is, we could all hope for a more sustainable hobby. I really do think that your product might be one of the ones that can help us kind of get to where we're trying to go, if that makes sense. Because once we get into the aquaculture kind of part of this conversation, it's
mhm.
something that can help a lot of people going forward, and it might change the future of the hobby in general.
That's an
Yeah.
interesting segue because it definitely the some of the best uses of this microbe are in hatcheries, and that's certainly where they have been mostly used to date. So they've been used to treat wastewater in aquaculture facilities since the 70s.
Oh wow.
And yeah, there are quite a few uses there, but I think well, just moving on from the aquaculture side, one of the impediments to raising fish in the first place, captive raised fish, is not really the fish; it's cultivating
Hmm.
the required
Variety.
amounts of food for them that are of the right quality and the right size. So uh, part of those, those challenges come from, you know, uh, providing enough copepods. Well, how do you get enough copepods? What do you feed the copepods? And
Hmm.
how do you balance the copepod, so they're abundant and nutritious for the larval fish to eat and all that. So definitely there's a huge place for these bacteria, I think, in the ornamental side. So far, we've seen it over for decades, actually, especially in East Asia, in the farmed, especially the farmed fish and farmed shrimp. Um,
That's actually
uh,
pretty interesting. So I have to ask, like, what made you want to develop? And this is actually a question from one of our users.
yeah.
Yama, shout out. What made you want to develop these products that you carry? I know you but the stuff on your site, there's only two products I've seen on your site, but I know there's a third product now that you're carrying, which is PNS. Was it substrate sauce? Is that what it is?
Substrate sauce, yeah.
So what made you want to
Um,
develop those? Yeah.
yeah, so it was summer of 2016. I was in I was living in Colorado. I was up in North Dakota briefly, visiting family and stuff, and getting ready to move down here again and work for Algae Barn, who I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Algae Barn was a bit smaller at that time, mainly exclusively doing pods and phyto at that point, and looking to expand. That was kind of part of the reason I got involved there originally. But um, there were, as there always is, different challenges to cultivating these microfoods,
Hmm.
and just in writing for them and doing other things, about phytoplankton and all that, I stumbled upon just like one paragraph in DeBalk and Sprung's The Reef
Mhm.
Aquarium Volume 3.
Wow, that's very
They
specific.
just mention, just this like um, esoteric little paragraph about photosynthetic bacteria, and they talked a little bit about purple non-sulfur bacteria. But it's just a short passage, but it just kind of captivated me because it's a photoheterotroph. They're photosynthetic, but they consume organic matter, and they're rich in carotenoids. So I latched onto that right away. In fact, even before I moved down to Colorado and started working at Algae Barn, I was like writing up a proposal to culture those and everything. So, contrary to the way the question was posed, the way I read it was before was that were you trying to fill a spot in the market or something like that? No, I
Yeah.
wasn't. I had no intention of selling this stuff. My intention originally was to culture it in-house to enhance the production and the productivity and the quality of the copepods at Algae Barn. So one of the things there were the carotenoids because, as you can see from the red and orange colors, it's loaded with astaxanthin and lycopene and stuff like that. And I wouldn't give away any trade secrets from Algae Barn, but I thought this would be a preferable source of carotenoids to the one that we were adding at that time because this is actually a live organism that the copepods could feed on, but it would also remediate the water. So it would consume the organics
Wow.
and
Yeah, that's a great,
consume excess nutrients that were in the water and
especially
grow.
anybody who's in a reef tank. Anybody who has a reef tank knows that they're struggling with nutrients. Some people are going too far off the deep end, right? But like it sounds like it's almost like it's too good to be true, and I don't want to get into that
Right.
conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well, I want to touch on that too because you have
yeah.
to temper your expectations with a live organism.
Mhm.
So, but that was the original plan at Algae Barn was to, and then of course the way things went, it was just like one thing after another, bringing on inverts and then fish,
Mhm.
and actually at this point I'd love to say one thing about algae barn too, and
Please.
with respect to the live to the captive raised stuff. To my knowledge, they still only sell captive raised stuff.
Mm.
So that's a big deal too, and that's almost
Yeah.
just as important as the people raising this stuff in hatcheries. The people that are putting, exclusively selling captive raised animals.
Yeah. No, it's one of those things. How many people?
Love too.
I'm assuming
Not a
most of the
lot that
people
do it
here.
exclusively for sure, but
Yeah.
anyway, yeah. So everything, everything we're bringing in there was captive
Wow.
races in terms of all the fish and everything, but setting all that up was kind of a distraction. All the systems and all the changes, and then we started bringing on macroalgaes, and then
Mhm.
just even
Macros
the
are big thing.
demand to this day, they can't keep ketomorph in stock for more than a week. Sometimes
I
it's
have
just this
questions.
avalanche of demand still years later. So,
I
long
do
story
have
short,
questions on that. Yeah, it's one of
what's
those
that?
things. Like I have a lot of questions. So like one of those things that I've been trying to push more is macroalgae tanks. And there's a few people in
Uh-huh.
here that have like crazy macroalgae tanks, but I feel like that's not a part of this conversation. And as much as I want to get into that conversation, I
Oh,
feel like
totally is.
yeah, I'll
Yeah,
push it forward. Yeah.
yeah, no, totally. I'll jump on that right now. So these bacteria actually consume. So again, they're a photoheterotroph, right?
Mhm,
They like light and they like organics. And where are you going to find a lot of light and a lot of organics, dissolved organics, in a refugium?
mhm.
Obviously, it's illuminated, but then you also have a rich amount of dissolved organics in the form of leachate that
Yeah.
the algae secrete, the so-called yellowing compounds and things like that. So you could use carbon to strip a lot of that away, but why not use a live organism that doubles as an extremely nutritious natural food source for the copepods and your corals, all your filter feeders down the line from fan worms to sponges and things like that.
Okay,
So,
so I'll stop you right there because I know
yep.
there's multiple questions about these specific
Mhm.
like inverts and animals that we want to kind of keep in our reef tanks. But there's one question that popped up before we kind of segue into the next section, which is
Uh,
from Akiriho. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Akiriho. I put a weird Spanish accent on things sometimes. They're asking what your favorite livestock is that you have currently. What's your favorite livestock?
hmm.
And
So I've always,
I'm gonna add to that why.
yeah, why? Oh, that
Yeah.
even, so I've done, I think in our earlier conversation, I said I'm like you, I'm a kind of a jack of all trades in this thing. Like I like everything. I like planted tanks. I
Yeah.
like ponds. If I could have it all, I would. I could barely maintain with all this going on. I can barely maintain a display tank as it is. But right now, I finally did something I really wanted to do in a long time, which was set up in non-photosynthetic coral tank.
Mhm.
And it isn't very well developed yet, partly because I'm patient and partly because I'm busy. But no, that's a huge passion of mine, and I'm very interested in trying these bacteria out on a few specific types of NPS corals, certainly carnation corals.
Oh, yeah, no, there's a couple
Definitely,
people that I
yeah.
actually follow on Instagram that it's one of those things that I know that it's not sustainable at all for somebody like me. But like I feel like your product might actually help kind of move things along into the more sustainable future for that type of coral.